Hey guys, so in this video we're going to go over how to create RESTful APIs in Go using the Gin library. So if you're unfamiliar with a RESTful API, it's basically a way for two computers to talk to each other. And there's different types of HTTP methods that can be used to send information back and forth between the two computers. So there's get, post, put, patch, and delete. Those are all different methods that you can use to send information back and forth, and here are the definitions. I won't go through them, but on your own time you can go through and look at them. But in this case, we're going to use the post method to call our add function that we have defined in our project. So let's go back to our project. So the first thing that we want to do is create a Gin engine. So this Gin engine will be a receiving point in our project to take in requests. So to create that, we'll use, first we'll define a variable. We'll name that Gin engine. And then we're going to use gin.default. And this will go ahead and create a Gin engine for us to use to accept requests. So you can see it's giving us an error because it doesn't know of this, this package yet. So what we'll need to do is copy this here, copy that, and we're going to cd into CMD folder, since that's where our module is defined. So what I'm basically doing is I'm going to download all of the dependencies for this, this package here, and it's going to go into this module here. So let's go ahead and do go get, and it goes and it adds all of the files that we need into our module. So now it's giving us an error, but that's just because it hasn't been used yet. So that's good. Everything is good there. So then our next thing to do is to define which HTTP method we want to use. So in this case, we want to use post. So we'll do post, and then we're going to put in our URI, which is going to be add. So it's basically like our endpoint that we're defining. Endpoint is like another, is a part of the API that we're creating. So the whole API has a URL that we'll call. It'll make more sense in a bit. So we have this add endpoint that we defined, but then we also want to put in the function that will be called once we hit this endpoint. So we'll do func, defining a function, and we'll create add. We'll just do, we'll do add handler. And it's pretty good at guessing what I need. So let's break this down. So it's taking in a Gin context. So a Gin context is basically kind of like it's like a global global object that can be passed, or is an object that can be passed into different functions so that you can pass information into the function without having to pass in each piece of it or put it in a large object. It just comes in the Gin context. At least that's my understanding. So in this case, in our Gin context, our request that was passed in through the user's input will be inside of that context. So that's what's being passed in, is the Gin context, which will hold the request information that was passed through. And then we're going to have the struct called input. And so the struct input has two different fields, and both of those fields are integer values. So we have A and B's, the two numbers that will be added together. And then we have this next statement here. So there's multiple things that are happening here. So first thing that's happening is we're binding the input that the user passed in their request to this struct here. So basically what I see it as is we're taking the input that the user passed in and we're extracting it and putting it into the structure, which is called input. So now whatever the user put in for the value A and B is going to now be contained inside of this struct. And if it doesn't pass, it'll throw an error. So it's basically taking this, checking if there's any, or binding it, and if there's an error, it'll be assigned into this variable here. And if that variable here is not nil, which is checking here, if it's not nil, then it's going to go back and send an error to the user, letting them know that the input is invalid. So the next part is to call the math funcs that we defined previously in this math funcs package here. So it's going to come here and it's going to use the add function. So I think that one's pretty clear. So it's going to add those two, then it's going to store the result in here. The next thing that's going to happen is if everything goes well, it's going to go ahead and return a 200 statement, 200 status code saying that the request was good. So we have this handler defined, but we need to make sure also that we're passing in the function. So now, when we hit this add part for the API, it's going to call this function here, and it's going to go through all of that logic. The next part, the final step, basic step to set up the Gen engine, is to say, or to start running it, and to say which port we want to run on. Now it's passing in 880, but by default, if we were not to pass anything in here, it would still be running on 880. But I'll leave it like that. So at this point, we have our request set up so that it can accept these requests through a HTTP method post, and then we're running our server. So how do we test this? Well, I guess the first thing I should do is just make sure the project runs. So we'll do go run main.go. All right, so we can see here that it's listing on 880. There's no errors that were sent back, so we know everything went well. So as I was saying, how do we know that, or how do we test this? How do we send a request to the server and get the output back? You know, previously we were just running this in the command line and it was spitting it back, but now we have to actually send a request. So what we do is we use tools like Postman to assemble a request, and then we send it to our server over this port 880, and also specifically to this URL add. So let's go ahead and create a new terminal. And what we're going to do is use Homebrew to install Postman. And again, Homebrew is a way to install packages. It's a package manager for Mac OS. All right, now Postman has been installed into our Mac OS. So what we want to do is just open up Launchpad, and now you can see that Postman is there. Let's go ahead and open that up. Nice. And you can see that I already have a project that's up here. That's because I had already had Postman on my laptop before. I just went ahead and removed it and installed it again for this purpose of this video. So, as you can see, I already have collections over here, but we'll create a new one. And we'll create blank collection. And we'll just name the collection calculator. Nice. Now we have our collection so that we can just know that all of our HTTP requests in this collection will be related to calculator. To be able to add a new request onto here, we just click on the ellipsis here and click on add request. Now it creates a new request. So by default, it sets it as get, but we want to change this to post. All right, and then what we do is we start putting in our URL. So by default, this is the base of our URL. It's HTTP localhost. When I say localhost, it means here locally on my laptop. And then 880, which that port was defined in our project. So 880 is defined here, and if you wanted to change it to something else, that would be where you would change it, is here in this function run. And then now we have to add in our add part. So this is the URI that gets added on to our URL. So we add this on here, and we have add. Now, that's all good. Our URL endpoint is good. Now we have to pass in the body. So there's a URL, and then the body is basically the message that we're sending. And this is going to be written in JSON format. If you're unfamiliar with JSON format, I recommend doing some Googling, watching some YouTube videos to understand it. But I'm just going to go ahead and just set it up, and you'll kind of see what it looks like. So our request has to have a field that has A and a field that has B. So let's go ahead and define that. So we have A, and then we have B. Nice. All right, and I'm just setting that up for now temporarily. We'll insert the values. So we see that A has to have an integer and B also has to have an integer. So we'll go ahead and pass an integer as the value for this. We don't need that extra one. Nice. So this is our JSON body, and this is our endpoint that we're calling. So all we have to do is click send, and there you go. You see that the result is 4. So those are the basics on how to set up a gen engine to accept HTTP requests, and that's how you would set it up for a post request specifically. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll continue to make more. Have a great day.